Thank you, Hannah. Welcome to the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act 101 presentation. Today, we have Wild and Scenic River program leaders from the Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, USDA Forest Service, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service who will be sharing basic information about the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. My name is Britta Nelson, and I am the Acting Wild and Scenic Rivers Program Lead for the BLM. My favorite Wild and Scenic River is the Green in Utah. I went on a rafting trip early in my college days with friends on the Green and just fell in love with it. I'm going to turn it over to Corita.
Thanks, Britta. I'm Corita Waters, our co-lead for Wild and Scenic Rivers with the National Park Service, and I work out of our Washington office. And my favorite river is one I get to row on in the spring and fall. It's the Anacostia River that flows right south of DC or through DC. And I really like it because it gives me an excuse to go birding too. So get to row and go birding. And I will pass it over to Nicole.
Thanks, Corita. My name is Nicole Gustine, and I work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm based in Anchorage, Alaska, and I'm our Alaska Wild and Scenic Rivers program lead. For my favorite river, it's going to be, there's so many, but I'll start with my first one that's near and dear to my heart, was the main fork of the Salmon River. My family and I did our first 7-day trip when my kids were really little, so it's really holds a lot of good memories. And I will pass it to Steve.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. My name is Steve Chesterton. I'm the Forest Service Wild and Scenic Rivers National Program Manager. What I always like to say about favorite wild and scenic rivers, it's so tough to choose. But it always ends up being the one that I've visited most recently, which in this case would be the AuSable Wild and Scenic River in Michigan. But also love my home watershed of Rock Creek in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area. Back to you, Britta.
Thanks, Steve. We are going to pause the recording for a short exercise. For the exercise, you will first turn to the person next to you and share what you currently know about wild and scenic rivers and your familiarity level with wild and scenic rivers. Take a couple minutes for each of you to share. Then share with this person what you're hoping to learn more about during the session. Again, take a couple minutes each. Welcome back. Our objectives for today are to provide you an overview of the history and content of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. We want to encourage dialogue between you and fellow participants at the conference, and we will introduce you to resources available to help gain an even deeper understanding of the Act. Let's take a look back in time to learn more about the originations of the Act. Rivers have long been vital to communities. People have worked, played, lived along, and cared for rivers since time immemorial. In more recent history, the very first ideas ultimately leading to the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act came from two people who, not surprisingly, had spent significant time rafting wild rivers. Two brothers, Frank and John Craighead, operated a survival training operation from a base in McCall, Idaho. In the early 1950s, their training course involved wilderness raft trips on the Snake and Salmon rivers. In 1958, the Secretary of the Interior, Stuart Udall, asked Frank Craighead to prepare a paper on river classification. At a U.S. Senate hearing of the Select Committee on National Water Resources, the Craighead brothers called for a system of federally protected rivers. The final committee report proposed certain streams to be protected in their free-flowing condition. The rationale for protecting rivers was because their natural, scenic, scientific, and recreational values outweigh their values for development, water development, and control purposes now and in the future. Then, in 1964, Secretary of the Interior Stuart Udall invited the First Lady, Lady Bird Johnson, on a rafting trip on the Snake River in Grand Teton National Park to discuss national conservation efforts that would eventually lead to the passage of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and the National Trails System Act in 1968. Building on the vision of these early advocates, bipartisan efforts to protect and enhance rivers led to the passage of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. On October 2nd, 1968, President Johnson signed the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act into law, establishing the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System. When enacted in 1968, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act designated 8 rivers and identified another 27 for study as potential additions to the system. This next graph shows the growth of the National Wild and Scenic River System in miles since 1968. The bottom line depicts the number of miles of rivers designated each year, and the top line shows the total miles of rivers in the national system over that same time period. There are now designated wild and scenic rivers in 41 states and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. The National Wild and Scenic River System has evolved significantly since it was created, with more than 200 rivers added since 1968. Some rivers were added in response to river development threats, and other rivers were added because people became more widely aware of their unique values or recreation opportunities. Some rivers were added because they were recognized as critical components of treasured landscapes, such as national parks or the California desert. Today, designated rivers are located in a wide range of ecosystems, ranging from interior Alaska to the desert Southwest. In addition, designated rivers have a wide range of uses, ranging from lightly used rivers in remote wilderness areas to rivers located adjacent to major metropolitan population centers. Currently, less than 4% of river miles in the U.S. are currently designated as wild and scenic rivers. This image shows all rivers located in the United States, rivers that have been dammed, dredged, or channelized, and rivers designated as wild and scenic. The blue shows all rivers, about 3.5 million miles. The orange reddish color shows rivers in the United States that have been dammed, dredged, or channelized, about 860,000 miles. The rivers shown in yellow are designated as wild and scenic, totaling 13,467 miles. Wild and scenic rivers are administered by the BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, and USDA Forest Service. While these agencies have their own regulations, policies, and guidance for wild and scenic river management, these agencies coordinate with each other to administer wild and scenic rivers across the system, thereby improving service to the American public and enhancing protection of important river resources. We will now hear from Corita.
Thank you, Britta. So now we're going to jump in, like this kid, we're going to jump into some of the specific sections of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and each of the provisions that those include, so you can understand better how our rivers are protected and managed. Section 1 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act establishes Congress's declaration of policy that selected rivers possess outstandingly remarkable values, scenic, recreational, geologic, fish and wildlife, historic, cultural, and other similar values, and that those rivers shall be preserved in a free-flowing condition and protected for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations. Section 1C establishes that the purpose of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is to implement the policies set forth under Section 1B. And that is accomplished by instituting a national wild and scenic river system, like we heard in Johnson's speech, designating the initial 8 rivers into the wild and scenic river system, and then prescribing ways that additional rivers could be added to the system over time through study. It's important to note that Section 1 also covers that the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is a complement to existing national policy of dam building. It really recognized that certain select rivers should be preserved in their free-flowing condition. In the initial description of the National Wild and Scenic River System, Congress charges us to protect and enhance river values. So river values is a term that's used to encompass the values identified in Section 1B of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. The three river values, when used in this context, are free-flowing condition, the water quality, and the outstandingly remarkable values, or as they're more commonly known, the ORVs. I'll explain each of these. Free-flowing condition is one of the three river values that's identified for protection under the Act. It's an important concept that comes directly from Section 1B, which states certain selected rivers shall be preserved in their free-flowing condition to protect the water quality of such rivers. As one of the three primary river values identified for protection, understanding what's considered free-flowing is crucial to wild and scenic river management. It is not, as first may be assumed, the same as a naturally flowing or flowing in a manner unimpacted by human activity. The Act defines the term free-flowing in Section 16B, and that definition is, as applied to any river or section of a river, free-flowing means existing or flowing in a natural condition without impoundment, diversion, straightening, riprapping, or other modification of the waterway. The existence, however, of low dams, diversion works, and other minor structures at the time any river is proposed for inclusion into the system shall not automatically bar its consideration for inclusion, provided that this shall not be construed to authorize, intend, or encourage future construction of such structures within components of the system. Water quality is another river value that's identified for protection in Section 1B. Concern about pollution was a prime motivator for passage of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. The Act directs river managing agencies to work with the EPA and state agencies to eliminate or diminish water pollution in designated rivers. Many rivers work in partnership locally to monitor and understand water quality. The third river value is the outstandingly remarkable values, or ORVs. And these are a collection of river-related, regionally or nationally significant values, and they are defined as part of the planning process. Section 1B of the Act identifies the river-related values which qualify as an ORV, including scenic, recreational, geologic, fish and wildlife, historic, cultural, and other similar values. The category that's listed as other similar values is not defined in the Act, but it has been interpreted to include resources such as botany, hydrology, and paleontology. You can find a full list of each designated river's ORVs on rivers.gov. In the Act, in sections 4 and 5, Congress outlined methods for two basic ways that studies can be initiated for rivers. Section 4 provides direction and provisions for conducting studies to determine if rivers should be added to the system. At its highest level, rivers are studied to determine their eligibility, their preliminary classification, and their suitability. 4A provides directions for conducting studies, whether agency identified or congressionally authorized, and includes the study report requirements. 4B and C require coordination with federal, state, and other political subdivisions in the course of a study, and Section 4D sets interim boundaries. Section 5 of the Act continues to provide direction for federal agencies to study river segments, including listing the congressionally authorized study segments, those initial ones we spoke of, establishing a time frame for studying rivers, outlining the need to coordinate river studies with state agencies and key political subdivisions, and articulating the requirement that federal agencies should address potential wild and scenic rivers in their own planning process. In partial fulfillment of Section 5D, NPS maintains a national listing of potentially eligible river segments called the Nationwide Rivers Inventory. We'll now just pause our recording and take a moment for each of you to look at the newly updated interactive map at nps.gov/NRI, to learn more about Section 5 study rivers near you. We ask that you turn to your nearest neighbor who hopefully has a phone or a laptop near them to navigate to nps.gov/NRI, and there you'll find an online map. You can use the search bar at the top to find a park, forest, refuge, or BLM land near you that may have rivers on the NRI, or you can use the search feature and type in your home address and see what's in your backyard. Try turning on both the Wild and Scenic Rivers layer and the NRI layer to see how these two river systems may connect. Now we'll talk about designation. Section 2 of the Act specifies two methods by which a river can be designated into the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System. The most common designation method is under Section 2AI, which specifies that rivers may be designated by Congress. The second method of designation through Section 2AII, which authorizes the Secretary of Interior to include a river already protected at the state level and upon request of that state's governor. This method is less frequently used. However, the 1968 House report expressed the hope that all the states will become active partners in the development of the National Wild and Scenic River System. The provision in Section 2A2 provides a way to designate rivers that leaves primary management of the rivers in the hands of the state, but also provides protection from harmful federal hydropower and water resource projects. 17 of the 228 rivers in the system so far were designated under Section 282. Now, I'll give a brief overview of classification, which I mentioned on the study slide. Essentially, classifications are measures of the level of development along the river at the time of designation. And note, different sections of the same river may have different classification. Classification is a recognition that infrastructure and access varies across the landscape. Some rivers flow through remote canyons before they flow under highway bridges. Understanding the surrounding development and its relationship to the river can help river managers more effectively maintain river values. We use the terms wild, scenic, and recreational to describe the level of access that is apparent along the river. Generally, as you see on the left, a wild river is free of impoundments, only accessible by trail. In the center, the scenic river areas are accessible by roads in a few places, but largely undeveloped. And then on the right-hand side, you can see an example of a recreational river, which may be readily accessible by road and may have some development along the shoreline. Section 2B describes the eligibility requirements that a river must be free-flowing and possess at least one or more outstandingly remarkable values. It also defines the criteria for establishing a segment's classification based on these criteria: the level of development on the shoreline and the amount of access at the time of designation. I'll now pass it over to Nicole to explain some other sections of the Act.
Thanks, Corita. Section 3, I was jumping ahead of myself. Section 3 provides specific guidance on the boundaries and planning requirements for the designated rivers. The role of the administering agency is to establish detailed boundaries for the Wild and Scenic River Corridor. The boundary is an average of not more than 320 acres per mile on both sides of the river, and it's 640 acres in Alaska and a few other wild and scenic rivers that's identified in the designated law, which equates to about a quarter mile or a half mile on the other rivers, and it's a quarter mile, half mile on each side of the river. In addition to establishing detailed boundaries for the Wild and Scenic River Corridor, they must be submitted to Congress and available to the public. Section 3 also specifies that agencies must develop a comprehensive river management plan to protect and enhance river values on designated rivers. Comprehensive river management plans are the blueprint for managing a wild and scenic river to protect a river's values and must be prepared within 3 years after designation. And this slide has a lot of information on it, and I've if you start at the top, that's what we'll kind of be discussing, and then moving around clockwise. All of these are requirements of the process and the plan itself. So to start with, you describe the existing resource conditions, including a detailed description of the outstandingly remarkable values, or those ORVs. You also define the goals and desired conditions for protecting river values, address development of lands and facilities, address user capacities, the types and amounts of use that can be accommodated, addressing water quality issues and in-stream flow requirements. The overall process reflects a collaborative approach with all stakeholders, including consultation with tribes, states and local governments, and the interested public. The CRMP must also identify regulatory authorities of other governmental agencies that assist in protecting those river values, and also includes a monitoring strategy to maintain desired conditions. Section 10 is a critical section of the Act. It establishes the mandate to manage the free-flowing condition, water quality, and the outstandingly remarkable values, ORVs, and it provides the core principles and standards for federal agencies administering wild and scenic rivers. It's often cited as the non-degradation and enhancement policy. Specifically, Section 10A directs federal agencies to administer wild and scenic rivers to protect and enhance the values for which the river was established. Section 10B addresses how the Wild and Scenic River Act provisions relate when a designated river passes through a designated wilderness area. The designated river would be subject to both the Wilderness and Wild and Scenic River Act. However, where there is conflict, the most restrictive provision applies. Section 7 is often considered the teeth of the Wild and Scenic River Act because it contains powerful features designed to protect rivers from the harmful effects of hydropower and water resource projects. In general, water resource projects modify the river channel in some way. Key points of Section 7 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act include the following. Prohibits the licensing of new hydropower facilities. Examples would include dams, water diversions, bridge crossings, boat ramps, channelizing the river, and stabilizing riverbanks. It does require a written assessment of how a project could affect river-related values, including free-flowing condition, ORVs, and water quality. It requires the river administering agency to evaluate a project and make the Section 7 determination. The outcome of the Section 7 determination controls whether a federal agency can permit, fund, or assist the project. An important note is river classification has no effect on Section 7 determinations. Regardless of a river's classification, the standards are the same for projects on segments classified as recreational, scenic, or wild. So Section 9 is a pretty strong part of the Act without much gray area. Section 9 addresses mining and minerals on designated and congressionally authorized study rivers. Specifically 9A, designated rivers, and then 9B is for the study rivers. 9A, with the designated rivers, mining and leasing activities are subject to valid existing rights. Wild river areas are withdrawn from mining and mineral leasing within 1/4 mile of the banks. Scenic and recreational river areas are not statutorily withdrawn, but can be administratively withdrawn. And with 9B, congressionally authorized study rivers, all Section 5A rivers are withdrawn from the mining for periods specified in Section 7B, usually 3 years. And not withdrawn from mineral leasing laws. So continuing on with a little bit on Section 10 and then also Section 11. Section 10E sets the stage for joint river administration and management. It encourages state and local participation in protecting congressionally designated rivers, and it authorizes federal administering agencies to enter into cooperative agreements for this purpose. Section 11 of the Act sets the stage for assisting, advising, and cooperating with states or other political subdivisions, landowners, private organizations, or individuals to plan, protect, and manage river resources. Section 6, 8, and 12 addresses federal lands. Section 6 covers land acquisition procedures and limitations. An agency may try to acquire land from willing sellers to help protect the ORVs or help with the manageability of the river, but rarely uses condemnation. The appropriate secretary is also authorized to accept donation of lands and interest in lands, funds, and other properties for use in connection with the administration of the designated river segment. Section 8 retains all public lands and federal ownership within the designated and congressional study river corridors. However, there are provisions for exchanges and leases. Section 8B provides specific direction on how long lands are withdrawn, depending upon your stage in the congressional study process. And Section 12 recognizes that federal agencies can potentially implement projects and actions that can affect designated rivers, such as these logging activities within a river corridor. It requires all federal agencies to take actions to protect lands which are included, border upon, or are adjacent to congressionally designated and authorized study rivers in accordance with the Wild and Scenic River Act. Section 12 recognizes that many federal agencies can potentially implement projects and actions that can affect designated rivers, such as these logging activities. 12A states that other federal agencies are to take actions to protect lands. And 12C directs federal agencies to cooperate with EPA and appropriate state water pollution control agencies. Section 13 addresses these rights of the state and establishes the federal reserved water rights and the quantity necessary to protect river values. Although the Wild and Scenic River Act is designed to protect rivers, the Act is careful to protect areas of state authority. And now I'll pass it over to Steve.
Thanks, Nicole. So we're going to take a moment now to talk a little bit more about the Interagency Wild and Scenic Rivers Coordinating Council, of which the four of us are members and representatives of our agency. This is an interagency body consisting of both national and field level staff focused on coordination and across all four federal Wild and Scenic River administrating agencies, striving for consistent interpretation of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and management as one national Wild and Scenic River system, maintaining it as the national and international standard for river conservation. And we partner very closely with River Management Society and the River Training Center and the development of lots of different training products. And we also manage the site rivers.gov, which includes information on each Wild and Scenic River, as well as technical and training materials about the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and the system itself. So this is another opportunity to pause the recording and take a moment to use your laptops or phones or tablets. And in this case, go to rivers.gov and navigate to the Find a River location on rivers.gov and select a river that you'd like to learn more about. Select a designated Wild and Scenic River. It could be one that you're very familiar with. It could be one that you've never been to before. It could be one in Southern Oregon that you're close to right now. But take a few moments to select a river, go to that Wild and Scenic River page, and learn a little bit more in particular about that designation, including its outstandingly remarkable values, its classification, which federal river administrating agency or state administers the river, and anything else you might learn in the process. So you can pause the recording button now and then come back in a few minutes. Now that you've had an opportunity to learn a little bit more on rivers.gov about a particular wild and scenic river and absorb all the information that we've presented to you during this session, now would like you to turn to your neighbor, either the previous neighbor that you discussed some things with before, or a person on your other side, or small groups, to talk a little bit more about what you've learned during the session, and in particular, any questions you have, whether it's the navigating rivers.gov and what you just learned about a particular wild and scenic river, or the various provisions in the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and their implications for river management and administering the National Wild and Scenic River System. So I want you to get in those groups and talk through questions that you might have, and then if there's time at the end to share with the full room, so we can have some broader learning and prompting of questions that hopefully this session has had for folks. So we'll pause the recording again and give you all time to get into small groups and share with one another. Now that you've had that opportunity for sharing, just want to wrap up with some additional resources that hopefully you can utilize to learn more about the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Hopefully this session has piqued your interest, and in addition to the questions that it's prompted, you're inspired hopefully to get out and explore wild and scenic rivers or learn more about them. You've got a QR code on the screen here that you can scan with your phone to go to the rivers.gov training page with lots of different information available, including links to technical papers, online modules, the River Training Center, YouTube video page. So lots of great resources available that we wanted to make you aware of before you leave today. And lastly, just wanted to say thank you all for joining. Thank you to our host, Hannah, for helping us with this session. We wish we could be there in person with you, but know that you're having a really great learning experience and opportunity in Ashland and Southern Oregon this week. And even though federal agencies play a key role in administering the National Wild and Scenic River System, it's each and every individual and their love for these rivers that really translates the vision of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act into the reality of protection and enhancement of these rivers for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations. So I hope you all feel a part of that and have learned a little bit throughout the process of this session today. You've got our emails here if you'd like to reach out with any questions. We definitely invite that and look forward to hearing from you. So with that, we'll close the session, and thanks again.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.